The wind moved quietly across the dry fields of Red Hollow Ranch, carrying dust and silence in equal measure. It had been years since laughter had touched that land, years since anything resembling warmth had lived there at all. Ethan Cole stood near the fence line, his hands resting on rough wood worn down by time, his gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the horizon. People in town said he used to be different, said there was a time when he smiled easy, spoke more, even laughed loud enough to be heard across a room. But that was before the fire, before the loss that took everything with it. Now he was a man shaped by silence. He worked, he ate, he slept, and he kept the world at a distance that no one had managed to cross, not once. Until the letter came. He hadn't expected it, didn't ask for it. In fact, when the boy from town handed it to him, he had almost thrown it aside without opening it. "Came from the agency," the boy had said, shifting awkwardly. "They said you, signed something a while back." Ethan frowned, taking the letter slowly. Signed something? It took him a moment to remember. Months ago, maybe longer. A night when the silence had pressed too hard, when the emptiness of the house had felt louder than anything else. He had filled out the form without thinking. A mail-order bride request. It had meant nothing at the time. Just something to do. Something to distract himself from the weight of everything he had lost. He hadn't expected a response. But now, standing there with a letter in his hand, he realized something had been set in motion, whether he wanted it or not. He opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the short message. Arrival confirmed. Tomorrow. That was it. No details, no turning back. Ethan exhaled slowly, folding the paper with more care than necessary. Should have burned it, he muttered under his breath. But he hadn't. And now, it was too late. The next day came faster than he wanted it to. The sun hadn't fully risen when he rode into town, his expression as unreadable as ever. People noticed. They always did when Ethan Cole showed up, not because he caused trouble, but because he didn't belong to the noise anymore. He tied his horse near the small station and waited. Minutes passed, then more, until finally the train whistle echoed in the distance, cutting through the quiet morning air. It pulled in slow, heavy, carrying with it the usual mix of passengers and uncertainty. Ethan stood still as people began to step off, families, workers, travelers passing through. None of them looked like they belonged to him. And then, she appeared. She stepped down carefully, nearly missing the last step and catching herself at the last second with a small, awkward stumble. A few people nearby chuckled under their breath, but she didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did and chose not to react. She adjusted her grip on a small suitcase that looked heavier than it should have been and glanced around, clearly searching for something or someone. Ethan watched her for a moment, something unfamiliar stirring faintly in his chest. Not interest, not yet, just curiosity. She spotted him then, or rather, she spotted the way he stood apart from everyone else. Her eyes lingered for a second, then she walked toward him, carefully, like each step required more thought than it should. When she reached him, she stopped, slightly out of breath but trying to hide it. "Ethan Cole?" she asked. Her voice was softer than he expected, but steady. He nodded once. "You're early," he said. It wasn't a greeting, just a fact. She blinked, then gave a small, uncertain smile. "I didn't think trains could be early," she admitted. A pause. Then, as if realizing how that sounded, she added quickly, "But I suppose they can be when you least expect them." Ethan stared at her for a second. Not confused, just unprepared for that kind of answer. She hesitated, shifting the suitcase awkwardly from one hand to the other before nearly dropping it again. "I'm Anna." She extended her hand, then seemed unsure if that was the right thing to do, pulling it back slightly before offering it again. The movement was clumsy, unpolished, real. Ethan looked at her hand, then at her face. Then after a brief pause, he shook it. Once, firm, then let go. "You packed light," he said, nodding toward the suitcase. Anna glanced down at it, then back at him. "It looks lighter than it is," she said honestly. "I may have underestimated how much I own." Another pause. Then she added, quieter this time, "or how far I was going." That landed differently. Ethan didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned slightly, gesturing toward his horse. "We've got a ride," he said. She nodded quickly. "Right, of course." She followed him, though not without another small stumble, when her foot caught on uneven ground. This time she let out a soft, embarrassed laugh under her breath. Ethan heard it, and for the briefest second, just a second, something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, not yet, but something close enough that it mattered. The ride back to the ranch was quiet at first. Anna sat carefully behind him, holding on just enough to stay balanced, clearly trying not to be a burden. After a while she spoke. "It's quiet out here," she said. Ethan didn't look back. "That's the point." She considered that. "I think I like it," she added after a moment. He didn't respond, but he didn't dismiss it either. When they reached the ranch, Anna took a moment to take it all in. The land, the house, the silence that seemed to stretch in every direction. "It's bigger than I imagined," she said softly. Ethan dismounted, helping her down before stepping back. "It's work," he said. She nodded. "I can do work." He studied her briefly, then turned toward the house. "We'll see." The days that followed weren't easy. Anna wasn't used to ranch life. That much was obvious from the start. She tripped over tools, spilled water more than once, and nearly dropped a basket of eggs on her second morning. But she never complained, not once. Instead, she laughed at herself, quietly, a little awkwardly, but genuinely. And slowly, that laughter began to echo in places that had been silent for far too long. Ethan noticed. He didn't say anything about it, but he noticed. One afternoon, as she struggled to carry a bucket that was clearly too heavy, she lost her grip entirely, sending water spilling everywhere, including onto his boots. She froze immediately, her eyes wide. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean—" She stopped when she heard it. A sound. Low, rough, unfamiliar. It took her a second to realize what it was. Ethan had laughed. Not loud, not long, but enough. Enough that it broke through years of silence in a single, unexpected moment. Anna blinked, surprised. He seemed just as surprised as she was. The sound faded quickly, his expression tightening again, as if he didn't quite know what to do with it. But it had happened, and neither of them could ignore that. Anna's lips curved into a small smile, not mocking, not teasing, just warm. "Well," she said softly, "that's a start." Ethan didn't respond, but for the first time in years, the silence between him and another person didn't feel empty. It felt different, and he wasn't sure what to do with that. The moment lingered longer than either of them expected. The faint echo of his laugh seemed to hang in the air, as if the ranch itself didn't quite believe it had heard something like that again. Ethan cleared his throat slightly, his expression tightening as he stepped back, brushing a bit of dust from his sleeve, like it had something to do with what just happened. "Careful with the buckets," he muttered, his voice returning to its usual low tone. Anna nodded quickly, though the small smile didn't fully leave her face. "I will," she said, though it was clear she was trying not to point out the obvious, that something had just changed. And it had, even if he refused to acknowledge it, even if he tried to bury it beneath routine and silence, something had shifted. The days continued, but they didn't feel the same anymore. There was still work, still long hours, still quiet. But now the quiet wasn't as heavy. Anna filled it in ways she didn't even realize. Small comments, soft observations, the occasional clumsy moment followed by her own quiet laughter. And every now and then Ethan would react, not always with words, but with something less guarded than before. A glance that lingered a second longer. A response that came a little quicker. It was slow, subtle, but real. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and amber, Anna sat on the porch steps, her hands resting loosely in her lap. She looked tired, but not in a defeated way. More like someone who had worked hard and earned the right to rest. Ethan stepped out a moment later, stopping just behind her before leaning lightly against the wooden post. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Not anymore. "You used to laugh more, didn't you?" Anna said suddenly, her voice gentle but direct. Ethan didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, his jaw tightening slightly. "People say things," he replied after a moment. "That's not what I asked," she said softly. He glanced at her then, just briefly. "No," he admitted, "I didn't." Anna nodded slowly, as if that was enough for now. She didn't push further, didn't ask why. Instead, she let the moment pass, respecting the space he wasn't ready to fill. But the question stayed with him. Later that night, after she had gone inside, Ethan remained on the porch, staring out into the dark. The past wasn't something he visited often. He had learned not to. But now it came back whether he wanted it to or not. The memory of fire, the sound of cracking wood, the silence that followed, and the laughter that had disappeared with it. He closed his eyes briefly, his hands tightening against the railing. Then he exhaled slowly, pushing it back down where it had stayed buried for years. The next morning started like any other, but it didn't stay that way. Anna was in the kitchen, attempting to prepare breakfast. Attempting being the key word. There was a faint smell of something burning, followed by the sound of a pan being moved too quickly. "I think I may have misjudged the heat," she admitted as Ethan stepped inside. He looked at the pan, then at her. Then, unexpectedly, a small breath of amusement escaped him. Not quite a laugh, but close enough. Anna noticed immediately. "That's twice now," she said, raising an eyebrow slightly. "I should start keeping track." Ethan shook his head lightly, stepping forward to take the pan from her before it got any worse. "You're going to burn the place down," he said. She winced slightly. "I'd rather not do that." A pause. Then she added, "I think you've had enough fire in your life already." The words slipped out before she could stop them. The moment they did, the air shifted. Ethan froze slightly, his grip on the pan tightening just enough to notice. Anna's expression changed instantly. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean—" "It's fine," he cut in, his voice low but controlled. But it wasn't fine. Not completely. The silence that followed wasn't the same as before. It was heavier, fragile. Anna looked down, clearly regretting the words, unsure how to fix something she didn't fully understand. Ethan set the pan aside, taking a step back. For a moment, it looked like he might walk out, return to distance, to silence. But he didn't. Instead, he stayed. He leaned back slightly against the counter, his gaze unfocused for a second before settling again. "It wasn't just the fire," he said quietly. Anna looked up, surprised. He didn't look at her. "I lost everything that mattered in it," he continued. The words came slow, careful, like each one had to be pulled from somewhere he had kept locked away. After that, laughing didn't make much sense anymore. Anna didn't interrupt, didn't move. She just listened, because she understood something important in that moment, that this wasn't easy for him, and it wasn't something he would repeat. "I didn't know," she said softly. "You weren't supposed to," he replied. A small silence followed. Then Anna took a careful step closer. Not too close, just enough to be present. "I'm not here to replace anything you lost," she said gently. "I know," he said. "But," she hesitated slightly, choosing her words, "that doesn't mean nothing new can exist." That made him look at her, really look at her. There was no pity in her expression, no pressure, just honesty, and something else, something steady. "You laugh," he said after a moment. She blinked. "Sometimes at the wrong moments," she admitted. "It's not always intentional." A faint hint of something touched his expression again. Not quite a smile, but close. "It's different," he said. "Good different?" she asked carefully. He hesitated, then nodded once. "Yeah." That was enough. The days that followed felt lighter, not because the past had disappeared, but because it didn't fill every space anymore. Anna continued to be exactly who she was, clumsy, honest, quietly persistent, and Ethan changed. Slowly, the way a hard winter gives way to spring, not all at once, but enough to notice. One evening as they worked near the fence line, Anna tripped over a loose board, catching herself just before falling completely. She let out a soft laugh at her own mistake. Ethan watched her for a second. Then without warning, he laughed again. This time it lasted longer. Not forced, not restrained. Real. Anna looked at him surprised, then smiled. "That one counts twice," she said. He shook his head slightly, but the expression didn't fade as quickly this time. They stood there for a moment, the fading sunlight stretching long shadows across the land. "You know," Anna said quietly, "you're different now." Ethan glanced at her. "How?" "You don't look like you're carrying everything alone anymore," she said. He considered that, then looked out across the ranch. "Maybe I'm not," he admitted. The words settled between them, simple but meaningful. Anna nodded slightly, her gaze following his. A quiet understanding passed between them. Not rushed, not forced, just there. And as the sun slipped below the horizon, leaving behind a soft, steady glow, Ethan realized something he hadn't allowed himself to think in years. The past hadn't disappeared, but it wasn't all there was anymore, because somehow, without trying, without forcing, without even realizing it at first, a clumsy, unexpected woman had walked into his life and brought something back he thought was gone forever. And this time, he didn't push it away.